Your heart beats approximately 100,000 times a day, but you never truly notice it until it becomes the loudest sound in the universe. Imagine standing inches away from a friend as they scream for their life, their face contorted in agony, their throat straining until the veins bulge like thick cords, and hearing absolutely nothing. This is not a sudden loss of hearing, and it is not a dream. This is the reality of the silent zone, a predatory vacuum where the laws of physics seem to bend to the will of a new kind of hunter. It is a biological anomaly that has turned the simple act of making noise into a death sentence, and the most terrifying part is that you won't know you've entered its territory until the world around you simply stops existing for your ears. The first reports came from the deep forests of the Pacific Northwest, though they were dismissed for months as atmospheric anomalies or collective hysteria. Hikers would disappear, and when search parties went looking for them, they would return with stories of dead air. They described patches of the woods where the wind didn't rustle the leaves, where the birds didn't chirp, and where even the sound of their own footsteps muffled into a soft, indistinct thud. It wasn't until a research team from the University of Bioacoustics vanished entirely that the world began to take the threat seriously. They left behind a single digital recorder that had been running for 12 hours. On the tape, there was nothing but a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated at a frequency just below the range of human hearing, followed by 6 hours of absolute, terrifying digital silence. We used to believe that sound was a constant, a fundamental background of life. We rely on it for survival more than we realize. We hear the car approaching from behind, the snap of a twig in the dark, the sharp intake of breath before a strike. But evolution has found a way to strip that armor away. Biologists have theorized that a mutation occurred in a localized population of apex predators, likely a subspecies of large nocturnal owls or perhaps a new branch of feline hunters. These creatures didn't just learn to be quiet, they developed a specialized organ, a series of crystalline structures within their respiratory systems that act as an acoustic black hole. They don't just move silently, they project a field that absorbs every vibration in the air within a 50-foot radius. Silas Thorne was one of the few people to survive a direct encounter with what the locals began calling the Shrike-Wraiths. He was a seasoned guide, a man who knew the mountains better than his own home. He was leading a small group of environmental surveyors when they crossed the invisible threshold. Silas remembers the exact moment the world broke. 1 second, his companion, a young woman named Sarah, was laughing at a joke he'd made. The next, the laughter was cut off as if a wire had been snipped. He saw her mouth moving, her chest heaving with the force of her voice, but nothing came out. He reached for his radio, but when he pressed the button, the familiar static was gone. He tapped the device against his palm, then against a rock. Nothing. No plastic click, no stone-on-stone scrape. The terror of the silent zone is not just the absence of noise, it is the physical pressure that accompanies it. Sound waves are energy, and when that energy is absorbed, the air feels heavy, almost viscous. Silas described it like being submerged in thick oil. He watched Sarah turn around, her eyes wide with a realization that mirrored his own. She pointed behind him, her face pale. Silas turned, but there was nothing there. Or rather, there was a distortion in the air, a shimmering ripple that looked like heat rising off a summer road. It moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. He tried to shout a warning, to tell the others to run, but his own voice died in his throat. He could feel his vocal cords vibrating, he could feel the air leaving his lungs, but the silence remained absolute.
It's getting closer.
The predator does not need to hide when it can steal your ability to perceive it. It moved towards Sarah first. Silas could only watch, paralyzed by the sensory deprivation. He saw the creature emerge from the shadows of the hemlocks. It was massive, covered in feathers that didn't look like feathers at all, but more like shards of obsidian that drank the light. It didn't growl. It didn't hiss. It simply existed in a sphere of total stillness. When it struck, it was a blur of motion. Sarah was lifted off her feet, her body jerking as the creature's talons found their mark. She was screaming. Silas could see the shape of the vowels in her open mouth, but the only thing he could hear was the frantic, thundering rhythm of his own heart inside his skull. This is the psychological breaking point of the Soundless Purge. In the absence of external stimuli, the brain begins to magnify internal sounds to a deafening degree. Silas could hear the rush of blood through his carotid arteries. He could hear the wet slide of his eyeballs as he looked from side to side. He could hear his joints grinding together as he moved. It was a cacophony of his own biology, a reminder that he was alive and vibrant in a world that had become a tomb. He watched the creature drag Sarah into the underbrush. He wanted to help, but every instinct told him that the moment he moved, the creature would sense the vibrations of his muscles and come for him next. The science behind this phenomenon suggests a terrifying possibility, that these predators are not just hunting for meat, but for the very energy that sound provides. Some researchers argue that the acoustic dampening organ is a form of biological cold fusion, converting sound waves into metabolic energy. The louder the environment, the more powerful the predator becomes. This explains why the zones are expanding toward urban centers. A quiet forest provides a meager meal, but a city? A city is a feast of constant vibration, a never-ending buffet of noise that could sustain a population of these creatures indefinitely. As Silas huddled in the shadows, he realized the creature wasn't just silent, it was waiting for him to make a sound it couldn't absorb. He held his breath until his lungs burned, terrified that the rush of air would act as a beacon. He watched as the shimmering distortion moved through the clearing, stepping over the gear they had dropped. It seemed to be searching, sensing for the minute vibrations of his pulse against the ground. This is the ultimate evolutionary checkmate. We have spent millennia building a world of noise to ward off the dark, but now, that noise is exactly what invites the darkness in. The survivors of these encounters often suffer from a specific type of post-traumatic stress. They become obsessed with silence. They move into soundproofed apartments, they wear heavy industrial ear protection, and they refuse to speak above a whisper. But the fear never truly leaves them. They know that the silent zone doesn't have a visible border. You don't see a wall or a sign. You simply walk into a space where the air feels a little thicker, and suddenly, your voice is gone. By the time you notice the silence, the predator has already noticed you. In the weeks following Silas's escape, more dead zones were identified. They appeared near highways, construction sites, and airports. The creatures seemed to be migrating toward the highest concentrations of decibels. In a town in Northern California, a high school football game was interrupted when the entire stadium fell silent mid-cheer. Thousands of people stood in a vacuum, watching as things they couldn't quite see move through the stands. There was no panic in the traditional sense, because panic requires noise. There were no sirens, no screams of run, just a mass of people moving in a desperate, hushed exodus, their footsteps swallowed by the earth.
You have to move.
Imagine the chaos of a major city where the emergency infrastructure relies entirely on sound. Think of a 911 dispatch center where the monitors show thousands of incoming calls, but when the operators pick up the headsets, there is only an oppressive, heavy void. Think of the officers on the street, seeing a crime in progress, reaching for their whistles or shouting commands, only to realize their authority has been erased by the atmosphere itself. We are entering an era where our greatest weapon, our ability to communicate and coordinate, is being neutralized. How do you fight an enemy you can't hear coming? How do you warn your neighbor when your voice is erased before it leaves your lips? The Soundless Purge is not just a threat to our lives, it is a threat to our humanity. We are social creatures, built on the foundation of shared experience and shared sound. To be isolated in a pocket of silence while witnessing the destruction of those around you is a horror that defies description. It reduces us to our most primal state, a heartbeat in the dark, waiting for the rhythm to stop. We have tried to adapt, using signal flares and written notes, but the predators are evolving too. They are beginning to sense the minute vibrations of a pen on paper, or the subtle displacement of air caused by a hand signal. Silas Thorne eventually made it out of the woods, but he was never the same. He spent his remaining days in a specialized facility, scribbling notes on a chalkboard because he refused to speak. His final note, written just before he stopped communicating entirely, read, "It isn't that they want us to be quiet. It's that they have realized the world is too loud, and they are the only ones who know how to fix it." He claimed that in the center of the silence, he heard something else, not a sound, but a feeling. A sense of perfect, cold order. It is a terrifying thought, that we are not being hunted by monsters, but by a corrective force of nature. As the zones continue to grow, the authorities have struggled to provide answers. They advise people to stay in monitored acoustic environments, but how do you monitor something that absorbs the very tools you use to measure it? The reality is that we are likely witnessing a shift in the food chain. For centuries, we were the loudest, and therefore the most dominant. We filled the air with the roar of engines and the hum of electronics. We made ourselves impossible to ignore. But in the grand design of nature, being the loudest eventually makes you the easiest target. The Shrike-Wraiths are not just predators, they are a consequence of our own excess. Consider the psychological toll of living in a world where you must monitor every breath. We have seen a rise in acoustic paranoia, where people are terrified of their own biological functions. They fear the sound of a sneeze, the rumble of a hungry stomach, or the accidental clink of a spoon against a bowl. Society is fracturing into small, silent enclaves. The bustling markets and vibrant nightlife that defined our civilization are being replaced by hushed hallways and padded rooms. We are retreating into ourselves, becoming ghosts in our own cities, terrified that the next sound we make will be our last. Tonight, as you sit in your home, listen to the sounds around you. Listen to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant rumble of traffic, the ticking of a clock on the wall. These sounds are a comfort. They are the evidence that you are still part of the world. But if you should happen to notice a sudden stillness, a moment where the wind stops and the clock seems to lose its tick, do not go looking for the cause. Do not call out to see if anyone is there. Instead, close your eyes and focus on your heart. It is the only sound you have left, and it is the only thing the hunters are listening for. The nightmare of the Soundless Purge is not that it ends life, but that it isolates it. It traps the victim in a private universe of terror where no one can hear them, and they can hear no one else. It is a slow, methodical erasure of the self. In the end, there is no grand battle, no heroic last stand. There is only the sight of the shimmer in the air, the pressure in your ears, and the final, lonely realization that your last breath will be taken in total, crushing silence. The world began in a void, and if these creatures have their way, it will return to one silent heartbeat at a time. We must ask ourselves if we are prepared for a world where silence is not a virtue, but a predator. We have spent so long trying to find our voice, trying to make sure we are heard across the globe. We have built towers of glass and steel that hum with the energy of billions of conversations. We thought we were building a civilization, but perhaps we were just building a dinner bell. The evolution of the silent apex is a reminder that nature does not care for our music or our messages. It only cares for efficiency. And there is nothing more efficient than a hunter that can turn your own senses against you, leaving you to die in a world that has forgotten how to scream. As you look out your window at the darkening sky, remember that the most dangerous thing in the woods is no longer the wolf that howls, but the shadow that says nothing. The silence is spreading, moving from the forests to the suburbs, creeping into the edges of our perception. It is a quiet tide, and it is rising. You might think you are safe in the noise of your life, but noise is a finite resource. Eventually, the hunter will find you, and in that moment, the only sound left will be the one you never wanted to hear, the sound of your own life fading away into the absolute, hungry dark.